Hello and welcome. This is the Succubus Scholar, and today I wish to introduce one of the absconded Succubus queens best known as Mahalath. Generally it is bemoaned that there is little to no information regarding this mysterious figure, but if one searches thoroughly and broadly, a fairly intriguing story comes to light. One that suggests a war amidst the Succubi that has nearly been lost to the sands of time. Possibly a contender to Lilith herself. Mahalath would rise and fall like many an empire over the aeons. But before I go into this, I feel it is important that we explore the events that brought about Mahalath's conception, starting with her father Ishmael, as portrayed in the book of Genesis. Abraham was troubled, for he had received a vision from the Lord that revealed he would be the progenitor of nations, people who would become as numerous as the stars. Yet his beloved wife Sarai was barren. It was Sarai who had come to a heart-wrenching decision, and bid her husband take her Egyptian handmaiden Hagar as mistress. A decision she would come to regret, for Hagar would become obstinate and require harsh disciplining and direction from the Lord in her own visions as a result. Hagar would indeed bear Abraham a son, however, Ishmael, who would become, as described in Genesis 16:12, a wild ass among men. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his brethren. After another vision, Abraham begins referring to his wife as Sarah, and learns that, despite her condition, she will indeed bear him a son herself. She gives birth to Isaac and, likely seen a contender to her own son's influence and inheritance in the future, grows furious upon seeing Ishmael playing with the child at his weaning festival. Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even Isaac. Genesis 21:10. Abraham was aggrieved, but, after yet another convenient vision to console his actions, he gives Hagar and Ishmael bread and water and casts them out into the wilderness of Beersheba. In despair, Hagar sought to separate from her son that she would not have to watch him die. But she would gain a vision again, for the Lord was generous in his visions in those days, promising Ishmael would bring forth his own nations before guiding her to a well, thus saving their lives. They would settle in the desert of Paran, generally regarded but not confirmed as modern Western Arabia, where Ishmael would grow to become an adept archer. It is here that the fateful meeting is brought about. And he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of Egypt. Genesis 21:21. This woman from Egypt is never identified, but more details as to her background can be found in the Sefer Mahalath 91b, as taken from Raphael Patai's Excellent Gates to the Old City. And know that the Kabbalists have written that the woman from the land of Egypt, whom his mother took for Ishmael, was the daughter of Kasdiel, the Egyptian sorcerer. So we can assume this woman was not some peasant or slave that Hagar bartered for, but the daughter of a sorcerer who, we shall see, was something of a witch herself. But it does raise the question, why would Kasdiel agree to this union of their houses? This is not detailed anywhere that I could find, but suppositions can be made if one considers the state of Egypt during this time. If we use the literist chronology of the Bible, Egypt was in the first intermediary period of its history, a time of war and famine brought about by the Pharaoh Pepi II's declining health and power and successor disputes upon his death. As those of his line squabbled over claims to the throne, the nomarchs, governors of the names, or provinces of Egypt, had grown in wealth, power and influence themselves. They would begin to war with one another before seeking to claim the throne. Chaos was rife within the country, with the conflict seeming to never end. It could well be that Kasdiel was one of these nomarchs, or an aspiring one, who had ambitions of attaining a dynasty for his line. With so many conflicts of interest in Egypt, it would make sense to seek allies from without. Allies such as Ishmael's house, and perhaps Abraham's also in turn, through this marriage of his daughter. If that was the intent, Kasdiel would be disappointed. As the Sefer Mahalath continues, and when Ishmael divorced her, according to the instructions of his father Abraham, as it is mentioned in the Besikta, she was pregnant, and she bore a daughter, and she was Mahalath, daughter of Ishmael. And the mother and the daughter participated in that desert in many sorceries. And so Mahalath is born as daughter of Ishmael, with the blood of the prophetic Abraham and the sorcerous talents of Casdiel running through her. But just as Ishmael was cast out, he in turn would cast out his divorced wife, likely in the hope of gaining favour with his displeased father and to reduce the risk towards his inheritance. No luxurious upbringing for Mahalath, instead being raised in the desert wilds as her father had been, learning the sorcerous arts from her mother's tutelage. With such supernatural abilities, Mahalath would garner the attention and affection of supernatural entities. The Sephemia Philot continues. And a spirit ruled over it, Igratiel by name, and that spirit was attracted to Mahalath, who was very beautiful, until she conceived from him and bore a daughter, and called her name Igrat, after the name of the spirit. With Igratiel's patronage, Mahalath seemed to garner further influence and power, later being named as one of the 4 queens of the demons, spawning more in her role as succubus to plague the mortal realms, as highlighted in a reference to the school of Rabbi Shlomo ben Abraham, as quoted in Patai's work. All the 4 queens of the demons, Lilith, Igrat, Mahalath, and Naamah, and all their cohorts give birth to children, except Lilith alone, who does not bear, but is just a fornication in the world. When researching this quadrarchy of succubus rulers, it seems that one of the prerequisites to become one of the 4 is to attain the interest of Samael, an angel of severity, a king of the demons, the demiurge, and more, depending on which text you follow. The 4 queens are also his consorts, which suggests that Mahalath and her own daughter would work together as part of Samael's harem. Mahalath is described by Michael W. Ford as representing repressed desires. Perhaps Mahalath played on these desires and fantasies to gain a position of authority for herself and her daughter through Samael. Indeed, with her own daughter taking a place at her side, it seems that Mahalath's star was swiftly rising within the infernal courts. When researching the hierarchy of succubi, this quadrarchy comes up frequently, the members of which seem to change with every telling, save that of Lilith, who presides over the other 3. The purpose of this is not simply to act as concubines to Samael, however. There is also a strategic purpose in that each queen is given a portion of the mortal realm to rule over and work their menace upon the children of Adam situated there. To understand Mahalath's place in this quadrarchy, I have resorted to peering into more modern works that claim to be taken from the Merkaba, though I've been unable to verify this. I am speaking of S.L. MacGregor Matthews, one of the founders of the Golden Dawn, who brings up Mahalath, her name now corrupted to Makaloth, in The Sorcerer and His Apprentice, where she is attributed the kingdom of Jonia or Ionia, now modern-day Turkey. It is in this work we gain a description of her. Makaloth, a form compounded of a serpent and a woman, and she rideth upon a serpent scorpion. An even more modern work expands upon this. In Michael W. Ford's Luciferian Tarot, she is aligned with the Page of Cups, and is described thusly. Makaloth appears as a woman covered in serpent scales, hideous and powerful, serpent eyes with matted black hair. She rides upon a serpent scorpion demon. He goes on to describe her as being very wise, particularly in the way of suppressed desires, as befits a succubus queen. These serpentine descriptions, combined with being granted the kingdom of Ionia near Greece, despite her Egypto-Arabic origins, links her closely to the Lamia and Gorgon monsters of myth that are common in that region, monsters that have been linked to Lilith and her king in other works. So perhaps Mahalath became one of these beings, or at least ruled over this class of demons. For reasons that are never fully stated, though perhaps it was out of alarm at her rapidly growing influence, Mahalath would come to clash with Lilith, to the point of war if the work of Moses Cordovero in his Orchid of Pomegranates or Pardes Rimonim is to be believed. This I have taken from 2 of Patai's works, Gates of the Old City and Hebrew Goddess. And about this Lilith, the bride of Samael. The Geonim explain that she controls 480 legions, as is the numerical value of her name. And on the Day of Atonement they go forth into the deserts, they march, and she screeches, for she is the Princess of Screeching. And Mahalath, daughter of Ishmael, she too is a concubine of Samael. And the 2, Lilith and Mahalath, go forth with 478 legions. She goes and sings in the holy tongue songs and paeans. and when the two meet on the Day of Atonement, they crawl there in the desert. They strive, the one with the other, until their voices rise up to heaven, and the earth shakes with their clamour. This passage conjures quite the striking image. Legions of demons marching into the desert wastes under their respective queens. Lilith uses her famous shrieking power while Mahalath counters with her singing. Before the two armies clash, Mahalath possibly riding in on her serpent-scorpion steed mentioned earlier. This is further expounded upon by Abraham Galante, who claims Mahalath's name reveals that she was a dancer, dancing before her army to perhaps boost morale before the opposing forces fell upon each other. The result of this battle is not stated, but again it is not hard to come up with a fairly likely assumption. Lilith had the greater number of legions as calculated from her name, Lylyt, as opposed to Mahalath, Mhlt. Another clue is that, other than the quote mentioned earlier, Mahalath is rarely mentioned again as one of the four queens. Interestingly, though, her daughter does retain that title. Did she not participate in the battle? Did it end with diplomacy for the sake of her daughter? Or did something more treacherous occur? Only they can tell, and for you practicing occultists, I do not recommend asking. There are those who claim it is a friendly rivalry between Mahalath and Lilith, but many more, myself included, have found it to be very much less so, with Igrat still bearing a healthy wariness towards Lilith and Nama. It is why it is with some hesitation and careful consideration I have made this video, lest I anger my own patron. Another significant clue as to the outcome of the battle is a simple one. Who is best known as the Queen of the Demons today? To my mind there can be little doubt that Mahalath lost the battle, and the following Damnatio Memoriae is why this information is so hard to come by today. As to what became of Mahalath, we can begin to tell by returning to the Sephemir Philot once again. And thereafter Mahalath became the wife of Esau, and she left the desert. Not so her daughter Igrat, for she and Nama and Lilith and Nagar ruled over the four Tekephot. So Mahalath left the desert. Perhaps she was even exiled, returning to the world of mortals, perhaps taking refuge at the house of her father Ishmael, before being married off to a mortal man as revealed in Genesis 28:9. Esau, a son of Isaac and thus her cousin. Her daughter Igrat would remain, and one Nagar would take her role as one of the four. There are two schools of thought regarding Mahalath's marriage to Esau. There are those who believe Esau did so to make amends with his father, who was displeased with him for having two Canaanite wives. Mahalath, who would also be known as Basemath here, was a symbol of Esau repenting of his improper marriages from before, as shown in Genesis 28:8-9. The other side of this view is that Esau and Ishmael sought to band together to kill Isaac, and to provide a means of bondage and trust in this, Esau agreed to marry Ishmael's demonic daughter. This is given in the Bereshit Rabbah 67:8 and Midrash Agadah, as taken from Pastor Geoffrey Daly's Rivers and Streams in the Desert. Esau did not mend his ways, and Mahalath was as evil as his first two wives. This later marriage was also the result of negative motives. Esau plotted together with Ishmael to kill Isaac and Jacob, to marry the daughter of Ishmael, and to inherit both families. Accordingly, his marriage to Mahalath was ki mahala, as an affliction, and only increased the pain his parents had suffered upon his first marriages. Whilst Genesis shows Esau mending his ways and Mahalath being a decent bride, there are many rabbinic commentaries such as those we have just seen that perceive this as insincere, with Esau seeking to manipulate and gain the birthright he had earlier sold to his brother Jacob, perhaps influenced by Mahalath's whispers. If so, Esau would not succeed, supposedly meeting an untimely end at the cave of Machpelah, where he was disrupting the burial of Jacob and was decapitated as a result. What became of Mahalath from here is unknown. Perhaps she lived a mortal life until time claimed her. Perhaps she returned to the desert and sought to reunite with her daughter and Igratiel if he still lived. At this time, Egypt would see the rise of the 11th dynasty and see the return of stability. So perhaps she returned to lands of her mother and grandfather. Or, more likely, she's out there in the wilds to this day, still in exile, but willing to aid those that seek her out for her knowledge and power, if they are willing to pay the price. That is all for Mahalath in this video. In time, I hope to upload one based on her daughter Igrat. I hope you agree from this that Mahalath is a fascinating character that played an enormous but nigh forgotten role in the lore of Succubi that bears further exploration by scholars of the Infernal. I would ask you, listener, have you come across any texts that I might have missed? Have you sought to contact her and had results? If so, do let me know in the comments as, despite being very much under the banner of Lilith, I would dearly love to learn more about this woman, who went from desert outcast to demon queen of Ionia to wife of Esau. Thank you for listening, and may Lilith grant you pleasant dreams.